Hello there. Welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week, along with Mrs. Force Ghost Conversations herself, Elise King, we are going to discuss the sixth and final episode in the Light and Magic documentary series titled No More Pretending You're Dinosaurs. Before we get started, I'm inviting you to join the conversation with us. We can be found on Twitter and Hive at Force Ghost Pod. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok just by searching Force Ghost Conversations. We look forward to connecting with you on those platforms. Also, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your listening site of choice. Finally, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it is time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. All right, everyone, welcome back to another installment of Force Ghost Conversations. And we are finally at the point of concluding our discussions about each and every episode of the wonderful Light and Magic documentary series. I thank you all for joining us this far on the ride. And if you haven't already, go check out those other episodes. I think that, if I'm going to be a little humble here, or not humble at all, frankly, they're pretty awesome. So be sure to go check those out. And, of course, watch Light and Magic overall. It's a great documentary series. And obviously, what are you doing if you're listening to this episode without having checked that out to begin with? Pause it now, go watch that, and then come back. Because honestly, everything's a spoiler after this point. So you've been forewarned. Also, just as some housekeeping, since this is a midweek release and not on our typical Sunday release schedule, we will not be covering any news that has taken place in the Star Wars or Lucasfilm galaxy this week up to this point yet. We will cover all that on our regular Sunday episode. So no Cloud City gossip during this episode. However, we do have a guest. Welcome to the show, Mrs. Force Ghost Conversations, Elise King. Elise, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Got my coffee. I'm feeling good.
You're ready to rock, and you're ready to talk some Light and Magic. Are you ready?
Yeah, I love this series.
Me too. And I think for us, being millennials and kids who grew up during the predominance of this episode when the films came out, this one really hit home for both of us, right?
Yeah, I got a lot of nostalgic feels thinking back to some of the movies that they talk about.
Let's get right into it here. The main film that they talk about at the beginning is the seminal Jurassic Park. And that is a threshold moment in cinema where it's, especially for both you and myself, in our enjoyment of the cinema and movie-going experience, but also for films in general, there's a before and an after when it comes to Jurassic Park. But I want to know your first thoughts about Jurassic Park as a movie. What were your first thoughts and memories of seeing this movie?
Oh, well, I love the movie now, but it was funny because my first time ever watching it, I was 6. And I was at my grandparents' house, and my dad put it on, and he let me stay in the room to watch it. And I just loved it. And I don't remember every detail, but I remember my mom getting really mad at my dad. Like, that's too mature.
Too violent, yeah.
Too violent. And he goes, and she literally laughed when that guy got eaten off the toilet. I think she's okay. And for someone who's not a scary movie person, there's a lot of tension, and I just think it's so well done. I love it so much. But yeah, that's my first memory of it.
Yeah, it's a great film. I think for a lot of kids in our generation, there is that I'm seeing this for the first time moment, which is really cool.
Yeah, and it was just the idea of oh my gosh, we've heard about dinosaurs, right? Even as a young kid, and all of a sudden they found a way to put it on screen, and I can see how they would have acted and stuff. That's nuts.
Now, I will say there is an alternate reality based off what we learned in this episode, where Spielberg would have went with Phil Tippett's vision of stop motion for the dinosaurs instead of the CGI that we got. Now, the question here is, Do you think Jurassic Park would be as groundbreaking or successful if that were the case?
Successful, yes, I think,
Hmm.
based off of how good Phil Tippett was at his job.
Yeah.
My heart breaks for him a little bit. Gosh, it was so hard to watch this episode because of that reason.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I think groundbreaking, no, right? Jurassic
Mm,
Park convinced a whole suite of filmmakers at the time and then following as they grew up that this was a worthwhile technology to invest in. And then we wouldn't
hmm.
have things like the volume and other types of technology for movies that we have today. So successful, yes. Groundbreaking, probably not.
Yeah, it certainly was the peak of a mountain, and then we all went down the avalanche afterwards.
Yeah. But I think I loved in this film about how they had to merge expertise together.
Yeah.
Because although stop motion was just discarded as the main way of showcasing the dinosaurs, I like when they said we still needed Phil Tippett to
Hmm.
teach the
Hmm.
computer graphic designers how the dinosaur should move. He had studied animals. He had like just studied movement in general
Hmm.
to make it to make dinosaurs move in a way that is believable. And if you don't have people with that expertise, then of course the computer's not going to know it.
Absolutely. It added almost a personification element to the dinosaurs that
Yeah.
would not have been there otherwise. I mean, I hate to say it, but that is largely a critique of the John Favreau Lion King, is that it's so photorealistic that you don't get those human elements.
That make you connect with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The loss of the animation, which stop motion is, in my opinion, a form of animation.
Yeah.
When you have that approach and that background melded into the mix of it all, at least having a voice in the room saying that, you lose some of those facial expressions when you went
Yeah.
for super photorealism.
Yeah, I think Jurassic Park is such. I mean, it stands the test of time because they somehow figured out how to make it real. They made the eyes believe that dinosaurs exist,
Hmm.
right? And they give you enough animalistic things, but also like you can see personalities in the dinosaurs. And I think it's because like throughout the series we see that Phil Tippett like gives a part of himself over
Yeah.
to what it means to be that animal or to be that character, and I don't know, it really shines through.
Yeah, I think it does
Because
too.
you believe like the velociraptors have a familial bond. You believe the T-Rex is like not just this, I mean, kind of a mindless animal, but like also like a hunter. I think yeah, that can get lost if you're just thinking clinically.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, just think about that scene that they talked about where it's the T-Rex chasing the the Jeep
Yeah,
as they're escaping. They're like, "How do the physics of this work?"
that was really fun because it would be like I think what's fascinating with computer graphics is like, okay, the world's open, they can do a lot, but that doesn't mean it's going to convince a human that it's real.
Hmm.
And there's so much behind the scenes in our brains that make us believe things are real. And they somehow pinpoint those things that make us lean in a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it's like the speed or the angle in which you shoot to like make a mind trick. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you're right. It's not like we're just seeing something. We're always seeing, and our brain is constantly analyzing, spitting back out information. And it just shows like you need humans to do computer graphics. You need humans to do CG.
I'm glad that people with multiple PhDs are working behind the scenes on this, because I don't know if I could do the work that they're doing.
Are you kidding me? No way.
These wonderful people that also have their own lives and personalities brought to the forefront too because of this documentary are just
the party
absolutely
kids.
incredible. So Jurassic Park, honestly, after Jurassic Park, the 90s is such a real testing ground for CG. And a lot of it, I would argue, of that era post Jurassic Park is somewhat dated now. But I think Jurassic Park largely holds up. We watch it pretty frequently here in our household. What do you think about that? Do you think like the effects hold up, or is there some moments that you're just like, okay, that's not great anymore, but I appreciate what it did at the time?
I'm like really trying to rack my brain if I've ever been like, whoa, that took me out of it. And
Yeah.
I can't ever remember viewing
Stuff nowadays more does that to you than Jurassic
now.
Park, which I think is a testament to its ability.
Yeah, I think it was like Jurassic Park was the perfect storm. Also, having dinosaurs lends a sense of wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we desperately all want to see dinosaurs real.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Agreed.
So I really can't. I think it was a perfect blend. I also think I don't think because it was the first, right? They didn't let computers do the work for them,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
They didn't rely too much on it.
Yeah, and I feel like later on, once they learned the technology, I don't know if it was just like ILM was that good
Mm-hmm.
or people just got a little lazy.
Yeah.
Because you definitely get pulled out in stories after Jurassic Park.
I think The Mummy Returns is probably the best example of, whoa. Now I know full well that that's a film that there are forces against that production, but in a case of like how CG could certainly take you out if it looks like a really bad PlayStation graphics scene.
Yeah, I mean, think like Harry Potter as well.
Some of those
The
later
Quidditch scenes
those
are,
later
like,
films
really bad.
Yeah.
Like and so I'm just like, well, obviously, I think it just shows the minds behind the screen matter a lot.
And the timing, like how much time that they have to put into it too. Like some of the bureaucracy of it all, where it's like you have a 4-month deadline to get this done.
You know what's crazy is like we've seen more documentaries in the last couple of years about Marvel and other Disney products and even Star Wars and they're like, oh, because of the pandemic, we had more time to go and make this better and watch. And then so knowing that and then rewatching it, I'm like, they were going to push this out without it being great because
timeline. They needed to have content come out.
It blows my mind that they're forced to do that because you need time for refinement. I mean, I think in this documentary, they said the people like learning the tossing of the head of the velociraptor took days to smooth out and make it feel real. Don't ask me to re-explain how they explained it.
No need for that. Yeah. We're in agreement with that one. I'm thinking like the Harry Potter example. That's a really excellent point there. It's like they were releasing those films yearly once they got kicking, right? 4, 5, 6, and 7, I think, were pretty much back to back.
I don't remember, but I know the first few, there was a long time between them.
But the first 3, 4, I think there is about a good year or two.
And the second one really steps up in terms of with the snake, the basilisk, like that looks a lot better.
But once the actors started aging, and they didn't want them to like be 30, playing a 16-year-old, they had to keep the pipeline going. And also, they're money making films, and this is a business at the end of the day too. They gotta meet the demand of the audience. So.
Yeah, I just think it's like because it wasn't like everything was spectacular after Jurassic Park. It really just shows. Computers open up doors, but it doesn't mean everything's laid out for you once you open it.
Yeah, they were so preoccupied with whether they could that they didn't stop to think whether they should.
But I mean, then we get because of Jurassic Park, we get the prequels.
That's a great segue, Elise. Yeah, ILM now had the resources to make the prequels happen. And I will say that one downside of the series, you and I both talked about this in the moment, is the lack of discussions around Jar Jar. We love Jar Jar in this household, and I don't want to speak for you, so I'm going to ask you the question: are you disappointed in that as well?
Yeah, I mean, we always talk about how it was such a moment in cinema of how they did motion capture, and they didn't touch on it that much. But I mean, this episode in general, they're trying to fit like 2 decades worth of amazing technology leaps into one episode. I think this could have been split into 2 if you really wanted to get into all of the different ways that this is used, from like the prequels to the volume.
Yeah, I really wish they would just do another mini-series in between.
The prequels are interesting. I will have to say this, I like the prequels from like a story character aspect, but this series, even in the limited view we got of it, I have even a better appreciation for what Lucas was trying to do with the prequels.
Absolutely.
And also how difficult it was for actors who probably had never had to just like act without any scenic
Yeah,
scenery.
Ewan McGregor is like, the volume?
I know, they walk in and they see like actual landscape.
This is what I'm supposed to be looking at here? This whole time it's not a blue screen?
It made me appreciate what they did. And also when we afterwards we looked at some prequel scenes and I looked closer and I was like, this is actually like pretty good.
Yeah.
For how much it was all digital. They didn't have as much. I don't know. I was like, wow, with only half a decade after Jurassic Park, like it made me appreciate it more.
Lucas was certainly pushing the boundaries on those films.
As he always did.
Phantom Menace alone is a great hybrid film of both, which ironically has the most practical effects of any Star Wars film.
Yeah.
With all the CG elements, of course, included too. And then Attack of the Clones is the first full digital film.
Yeah.
Revenge of the Sith then includes the first scene where it's all just digitally created. No actors are in the scene.
I know, it's wild.
Yeah, just amazing stuff that they're doing here. And of course, with Attack of the Clones, digital cinema is achieved. Do you like, how George had this approach with the cinemas where he literally gifted them the projector technology because they were so stubborn in their own ways to not move forward, and the fear of that? Do you agree with that approach and making them see how great it is?
I mean, I think we talked about this in one of the earlier episodes, but I will say I admire that Lucas had such a vision and he knew that this is what the industry needed, that he was willing to take a financial hit initially. I think
he'll make his money back. We're not crying for George Lucas here with his money.
But he was like, I'm not going to stall this project because theaters won't buy the right projector.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that, because part of leadership sometimes and convincing people of a vision is making it easy to accept it.
Yeah.
I know that's not always possible, but I thought that was a good approach. But I also am glad we didn't stay where the prequels took us. I'm glad we came back to some practical effects later on.
Oh, absolutely. Gotta have a mix.
I think Mandalorian and the Volume is probably the first time that we've been able to like really see a mix of both. And I think it adds so much to the viewing experience. And also we don't lose those great artistic forms that we saw in the first couple episodes of Light and Magic. Oh
wow, Elise, you're just on the ball here when it comes to transitions, because it's like you had a crystal ball knowing where I was heading next with my questions for you here. Not to skip over almost 15 years of material that's Light and Magic, but we have to get to the meat. So the Volume, as you noted, is the latest innovation developed by ILM. How do you think the Volume will change the entertainment industry, or it may have already? What do you think? Where do you think we're going after the Volume?
I mean, I think it's like I said, it's a great way. Like creators like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni and stuff, they don't want to lose those practical effects. Mm-hmm. One, it's a history of Star Wars, right? The monsters and all that. But two, I think it grounds the technology and realism that makes people believe the world more. Mm-hmm. So I think it keeps some traditions alive while also allowing for greater storytelling, which I think is cool. I mean, you and I have been talking a lot about what's the history of cinema, or what's the future of cinema. Where is this going? Like, what's feasible given like streaming versus box office returns, all that. Now, I don't know the real financials. Like, I'm not behind the scenes at all, but I'm wondering if the Volume will let people tell their stories on a cheaper budget.
Oh, absolutely, it does. Yeah.
And so therefore they can make more stories that would be really expensive to make.
Yes.
And not just superhero. Like, as someone who's really, really fond of high fantasy, we never used to see that because it's so expensive to try and figure out, see what camera wise. And now we don't have to travel all over the world.
Nope.
You can project what you would usually spend hours like rendering later after shooting, already like during shooting. You can do a lot before shooting even starts. So I'm hoping we get more stories that are harder to tell.
Yeah.
on a less of a budget, and therefore people are incentivized to keep making these
Absolutely.
movies.
And the saving grace too during the pandemic was that they could basically bubble.
That's what I was gonna say too. Like if it logistically, you're not carting a whole staff to another location, and you can bring families in if needed. I think it just fits our needs now, and it also fits needs of like things that were coming down the pipeline. But I think the pandemic sped it up. Obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in addition to everything that you added there, those are all fantastic points there, and true points too. The other thing that I would add to that is it just adds to the repertoire of what a creative mind can do. So if they want to use the volume, it's there. It's an option for them. If they want to shoot on location,
Yeah.
that's their prerogative if it's their budget, right?
Yeah.
It just adds to the arsenal of creativity that they have at their disposal. So if they say, great, I want to shoot 5 scenes in the volume, I want to do, so I can save my budget to do one outlandish extravagant scene here where I do 5,000 explosions or something like that. Like it just adds to their abilities to what they can do.
I mean, we've seen it with Marvel. I mean, not to go away from Star Wars too much, but they still build whole sets.
Yeah.
They built like a whole city from Pakistan for Miss Marvel because they needed the way to do the stunts. They did that. They built New York City for Doctor Strange.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
And so you need those things for different effects. So yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, it's just adding more tools to the tool belt, but also allowing, I think, movie makers to be nimble, which is important nowadays when there's a lot of like and bottom line questions around how do we make these in the future.
Yeah, and I hope it gives an avenue because of cost effectiveness that it gives. Not necessarily the stories. You make a great point that it gives an opportunity for certain stories to be told, but who's telling those stories? I think that's been hopefully it gives an opportunity for marginalized groups to tell stories.
Maybe
too.
Studios are more willing to quote unquote take a risk with an unknown storyteller because it's not on location in 6 different countries.
100% agreed. Yep.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. I didn't think of that.
Yeah. So, Elise, we're at the end of Light and Magic here. We watched all 6 episodes together. What would you say is the coolest thing that you learned as a result of watching this series? And of all the films featured, what would you say is like the one that most impacted you the most?
Oh gosh, I learned so much. It's not, as someone who's not studied or worked in STEM, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I can't explain what I learned, but like seeing people talk about conceptualizing Photoshop and how that led to CG.
Yeah.
It blows my mind because I'm just like, how did you conceptualize something that didn't exist and you made up a language for it? I don't know how you do it.
And do it in your garage in a weekend with your brother.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just like, wow, your brain, I mean, brains work differently.
Yeah, clearly.
I think it was really interesting to see them explain such complex ideas and make them not feel like they're high on a hill and like geniuses that can't touch us. I think Jurassic Park is the one that's like affected me the most. I really love that movie. I get a lot of feels around it.
I would agree with you on that one. That seeing the stop motion too is like a really cool thing. Just like, oh, this is what it could have been, which is equally just as cool, I thought. But
that
like
scene
for what
in
it
the kitchen
did,
with the velociraptors with stop motion, I was like, wow, this looks really good. Now so that's why I'm like, oh, I think it still would have been successful, but
for like, who knows? I mean, there's an alternate reality theoretically where a lot of things are more stop motion now.
It's funny that you're seeing more and more of it come back.
And it has come back. Yeah, it's like almost like a niche. Activity or property that people want to include in their films, but
and I love Phil Tippett.
And Phil Tippett's great, yeah.
So,
one of the other things too that I just wanted to mention is like at the beginning of the episode where the guy's just like, I did this last night because like I was like, why not? When he rendered the the T-Rex, and he just like had it casually playing on screen as Kathy Kennedy walks by.
I know. I love that.
Just like the gall, man.
I love that like it had to be sneaky. Because I personally appreciate that the business people, right? Producers,
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen Kennedy, even Spielberg on some level, like they really appreciated the artistic like views and perspectives of the creature, like the creature lab
Yeah,
and
yeah.
all those like traditional ways of doing effects. Like I love that they really admired that. And they put a lot of like ownership on the creatives. But yeah, like to see them like how they kind of like made like kind of snuck in there and they just like stood up in their seats and were like, everything has changed. We are
Yeah,
no
on
longer
a
the
dime, they
same.
just flipped a coin and then we were off.
And I was like, oh, smart, smart. I mean, it's all about how do you convince people. Sometimes you
Seeing
gotta
is
show it.
believing.
Seeing is believing in this case, for sure.
Ah, absolutely. So to conclude, the episode just starts with the fact that the story is now more important than ever. It has George Lucas saying that. I think Steven Spielberg says it. Jim Cameron, Robert Zemeckis. They just
Favreau.
Favreau. They're always like the stories, the stories, the stories, the stories, story. I think that is frankly the best way to end our discussion of Light and Magic overall. Now that you have such an appreciation of special effects, do you have to shift your focus now to be more on the story rather than fixating on the CGI?
I am someone who is very drawn to character driven moments. So I think I automatically gravitate towards the story.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I will notice if something, I now notice more if something pulls me out of that story. And so I think,
Yeah, we were getting a lot of pulling out in the recent Marvel show. We won't name.
I think for me, it's like, it's what Favreau and all them said of, is this serving the story? Or are you doing it because it's cool?
Mm-hmm.
If you can do it because it's cool and it's convincing, sure. But if you can't spend the time to make it convincing and serve the story, then I'm not interested.
Agreed.
So, I think overall I still focus on the story. I think I just have a greater appreciation for what it takes creatives to do behind the scenes now.
And boy, did we go on a journey with these folks from that little studio in Van Nuys, unair conditioned uh, warehouse outside of the airport, to all the way up in Modesto and California and San Francisco area, and working on.
Speaking of a story, they tell a great story through this.
And honestly, this was it was hard to not watch all 6 episodes at once and to space it out.
I consider the Imagineers or the ILM specialist rock stars, in my opinion. So.
I mean, the way that they personified them in the storytelling of this documentary, agreed, 100%. There's those guys, especially those 2 in the basement in the dungeon, were literal rock stars playing rock music as they're doing this.
Wild. HR would have a field day.
Yeah.
Only in the 90s could you do this. Only in the 90s.
So true. The grunge days are long behind us. Yes. And with that concludes our discussion of Light and Magic for now. Maybe they'll do episode 7 20 years down the line, once they have more to talk about as new things come down the line and all that. But thank you so much, Elise, for coming on and talking about Light and Magic. You were on like half of the episodes, I think. I
loved it so much. I was like,
so
put me on the air now.
You were very convincing to have on the show. We had great discussions off mic, and I was like, we got to record these. So I'm glad to have you on the show. We will certainly have you on for many, many more episodes.
Bad Batch is coming up,
Bad Batch is coming up, and you always have an open seat right beside us here on the podcast. For all those at home, thank you as well for listening and for tuning in each and every week, particularly to our Light and Magic series. I am so thrilled that you've stuck with us this far, because I know the documentary came out in August, and with Andor and everything else that has come out along the way, we had so much. We were spoiled for content here at Forest Coast Conversations, so we're glad to get it to you when we are able. So if you haven't already, go listen to all of our previous episodes in Light and Magic, and of course support the documentary on Disney Plus. It is really spectacular, so you will not regret it one bit. Elise, thanks again for coming on the show, and I love you more and most. Bye.